Danger Zone.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Welcome back, everyone. That music means only one thing. The week is about to get real because I'm your host, Kev Baker, and you are tuned in live to tonight's Kev Baker Show. I am fully recharged, refreshed, and raring to go. It's just as well because we have got another massive week of radio planned right here on KBS for all of you out there. Now, I hope you've had a lovely weekend and you too are ready for tonight's show. Get your pens and paper ready. I see some in the chat room saying the brain melt is about to begin. We're joined by our good friend, of course, tonight. Mr. Anthony Patch is with us. More from him in just a moment. Get some housekeeping out of the way, some big announcements. Wednesday night this week, not one guest, but two guests for your pleasure. We are turning it up a notch because not only will Anthony Patch be back on the show, but we'll be continuing our series of shows with the amazing Dr. Eric Karlstrom. Now, he deals with gang stalking, citizen targeting, stuff perfectly with all the information that we are going to be covering this week with Anthony tonight, Wednesday, and then rounding it all off on his show on Friday. So please, please, please take a note of all of those shows. And then one last note before I go to my trusty and loyal co-host, Mr. Johnny Whistles. On Monday, the 24th, it gives me immense pleasure to say that for all the KBS listeners out there, we're going to be joined by the brilliant David Heavener. Now, David comes from the hills of Hollywood, no less, and he's going to be coming on the show to talk to us about his latest project, something called The Last Evangelist. It's going to be off the charts. I expect you all here next Monday for that.
Oh, I'm doing fine, Kev. Thanks very much. Really looking forward to tonight's show. Another mind melt experience, really, when you think about it. The chat really is, right? Because this stuff just fries your brain. But you still need to know what they're doing out there, Kev. So that's the thing about it.
You know, that fry your brain, Johnny, there's a pun in there somewhere, and we'll probably get to that later on. We really will. But you raring to go then, John? Ready for this, as you call it, the mind melt?
Oh, yes, definitely, Kev. And just before we go there, I'd like to give a big shout out to The Rose Knows. Now, there you go. Or I could say it the Irish way, Kev, where it says, I told her on 30 it's The Rose Knows.
Absolutely fantastic. And that's a little coded shout out to one of our listeners out there. So then, let's waste no more time because we are joined by author, researcher, public speaker, and fellow host on Truth Frequency Radio, the man known as Anthony Patch. Now, over the past couple of years, Anthony has become one of the world's most sought-after speakers on topics such as CERN, quantum computing, science, quantum physics, the occult, Christianity, you name it, this man can talk about it. He's the author of a number of books, 2048, Diamonds in the Rough, Covert Catastrophe, Revising Reality. You can find all of that and a whole lot more, his new e-magazine as well, over at anthonypatch.com. And tonight, we are going to be getting into something called full spectrum dominance. But before we get into that, Tony, how you doing, man? You were on fire on the first hour of Freaky Friday the other night. Yourself and Joe raised the bar on you show. I hope you're all raring to go for tonight.
There we go. Thank you, guys. I appreciate the shout out there, Johnny. And we're just really fired up after Friday because Joe really came to the table fully armed, and it was fantastic to have him join us. And we're going to do that again with Joe because he is really, really knowledgeable and passionate. And a lot of great emails came in following that show over the weekend. And so Joe and I were sharing those. And, you can see that show here on TFR through the archives if you subscribe and support TFR. That would be fantastic. Just go to the archives and listen to last Friday's show. Take a fire extinguisher with you and some ice cubes, by the way, because it was pretty hot.
It really was. And, if you listen to myself, Anthony, and Johnny here, we like to lighten up some of these really heavy topics that we talk about. We like to have a laugh now and again, but we do take this very seriously, to the point where behind the scenes we get contacted from time to time by very important people. I suppose you could call them whistleblowers. Now, one of these people has been in touch with Anthony. I'll get him to speak longer and at more length about what's been going on in the background. But Tony, like I say, we're going into this full spectrum dominance tonight, and we're catching the attention of some quite important people out there working in the fields that we cover. And that's why, you know, we do like a laugh, but in the end of the day, this is very serious stuff.
It really is, and we try to balance it out. But yes, I have a good friend. I'll just use his first name, Sid. I won't use his last name nor the name of his organization, but he's an engineer, and he and I have been collaborating, sharing notes, and principally the information that is contained in Entangled magazine is what we've been sharing, so people can see the information for themselves there. But he is going to be making a formal presentation to his national organization this Friday, virtually on all the topics that you and Johnny and I have talked about for nearly 3 years now. Has been condensed into really what is a matrix document. It's a summary document backed up by, you know, my research. And we're going to go through that a little bit today. But this is carrying over from TFR into the halls of mainstream engineering at a national level. And they are listening to us, and they are picking up on the really leading edge tip of the spear information. So we're going to cover some of those topics today just as headlines for you. But this moves into Dr. Eric Karlstrom's presentation of full spectrum dominance on Wednesday. And we're going to really blow it out in terms of solutions, what can be done on Friday on my show. And this all folds into an upcoming conference. It will be a worldwide online conference that we'll give you more information about as it develops. But Kev and I are pulling together this huge conference online. You don't have to travel anywhere. And it'll be live streamed. And it is working title. The working title is Full Spectrum Dominance, because it really throws an umbrella over all the topics we've talked about for so long, Kev.
It really does. And, you know, artificial intelligence, we keep going on about this, but I want you to think about one word you can use to sum up artificial intelligence. And that word is control. Now, between Sid and Anthony and all of his research, they have put together a 3-page document that is basically an AI, technology, bioengineering, geoengineering threat matrix, and then some as well. And it's broken down into 3 kind of phases, Tony, isn't it?
It is. We have the preparation phase, the integration, and then finally the assimilation. So we'll give you the topics by, category here. Our audience is well up to speed. You guys have been with us a long time. You're the core group. We present this to you. This isn't, for me and Kev. We go through this stuff all the time on our own. But the point is, we're presenting this to you, and now we're giving you a summary of what is going on with mainstream engineering as they're addressing the same things that you as the audience already know about. So this will be kind of a review, and I'm sure we have new listeners out there as well.
And this first segment called the preparation, just looking at some of the topics listed here, not just our shows, Tony and Johnny, but all the shows on TFR really cover these topics at depth.
That's true.
I'm just going to take the first one, for example, here, and I'll get your thoughts, and I'll get Johnny's thoughts on this as well. GMO, genetically modified organisms. Now, Tony, we've all spoke about places like Monsanto, stuff like that, but how does this factor into the threat matrix?
Yeah, in the threat matrix, there actually is a category, 3 of them going across. The first is action, the second is threat, and then some examples that can be cited. But in the threat column, it's DNA modification. So genetic modification isn't just taking seeds and splitting them and splicing them and grafting and all the traditional methods, but it's literally just like the human DNA. They're going to the DNA of the living organisms, the plants, and they're gene splicing, they're modifying, and they're building and they're sequencing the DNA of plants. We've talked about sequencing relating to human beings, but it's also applied to plants.
Absolutely. And, Johnny, I'll bring you in here as well, because we've often spoke about GMOs, stuff like that. And I think we share the fear that, it's all very well using these things now, and it's relatively new science, but what happens 2 or 3 generations down the line? We've also spoke about the bees, Johnny, how they're suffering, but your thoughts on this GMO thing that's going on, and at least over here in Europe, Johnny, we're not quite as keen on them as the Americans, right?
Yeah, that's a good thing about Europe, because most of Europe has actually banned all GMO products. Now, there seems to be a kind of, I don't know what it is here, Kev, because we get told that there's no GMO being used in Scotland, which I don't believe for a fact, because once when I sent an email to Kellogg's in Great Britain asking them, was their cornflakes GMO corn? Their answer was the fact that what GMO corn could do to the British industry. It wasn't, no, we don't use GMO. And another one was last week, my partner June came in with raspberries. Now, these were like the size of small carrots. Now, I've never seen any raspberries grown anywhere in Scotland at that size.
Franken raspberries, and it wouldn't surprise me, John, even if they're not GMOs, some of the chemicals they use, again, makes GMO and the chemical stuff like that a definite threat. Now, the next one that we've all spoke about, and we've all witnessed, geoengineering, Tony, and this kind of has the same threats as GMO, because one of the threats listed is DNA modification. They're determined to tinker about with our genetic code.
Yeah, this addresses the third strand of DNA embedded in dormant nanoparticle scenario that we've talked about before. And so they're reflecting that in this. Again, it's an example of how mainstream engineering in the United States is picking up on the things that we're talking about and saying, you know what, these are legitimate topics, legitimate things we have to address. And they're taking it on our slant, Kev. They're taking our perspective, not the typical, DNA modification that you see coming out in the mainstream media presentation, that slant. No, they're taking our slant right off the radio and presenting it to their fellow engineers at a very high professional level. So I just really want to emphasize that DNA modification with geoengineering has everything to do with what we're inhaling, absorbing, and ingesting in the form of modifying our DNA from the environment itself. And of course, we had Dane Wigington from geoengineering on about 2 weeks ago, did a great presentation on this. He's one of the foremost researchers, recognized researchers in geoengineering. You can find that on, again, TFR, Archives, Kev's YouTube channel, my YouTube channel. We have that interview presented and with graphics. And we'll have Dane on again. We'll definitely have him back for another. And he's also a contributing author to Entangled magazine. Go ahead.
Johnny?
The thing is, sorry, Kev, mute button problem again. I don't know if this is true, but I had read somewhere that when Monsanto done any tests, if they done any at all, because I don't really believe it, but they said that the test for GMO, whether it was a health risk, was only 90 days. Now, we've seen the pictures of the mice with the tumours. It was almost the same size as the mouse itself. And they were fed only GMO corn. And this was going on for months and months, and even into over a year, where Monsanto had 90 days and they said, no, everything is fine. Weird.
Now, Tony, just listening to that there, I mean, this 90 days, and I was mentioning the problems with what happens generations from now, but this is where your article in silico comes into play, doesn't it? Because they won't use test subjects. They'll just model all of this on a computer, right?
Yeah, exactly. In silico simply means, in silicon. And what it means is that they're modeling in the computer the sequenced DNA. They break the DNA down into zeros and ones, and then they rebuild it in the model to see what they come up with. And that's designer DNA. You can do that with plants, as we mentioned. You can do that with living organisms such as humans and animals. So virtually you can, and this is all in the literature, you can design your own living organism from the basic building blocks. And that's what we're talking about here with in silico, is rather than having to grow it in a petri dish or a test tube, just to put it in familiar terms, you grow it, you build it, and it actually takes on a life of its own as a model in a computer. And you can do that with vaccines. You can do that with, designer drugs. You can do it for ethical and ethical reasons, benevolent reasons, or you can go to the nefarious dark side with it. But the point is, you don't have to grow it to determine if you are successful in that arrangement, that custom modification of the DNA. You model it in the computer. And this comes from the foundational research of modeling nuclear warhead explosions in the computer. So they took nuclear warhead technology and advanced it over into DNA.
And the overall goal of all of this is to control using artificially intelligent, omniscient, omnipresent deep machine learning system enabled through 5G wireless technology currently being deployed and connected devices that will activate the Internet of all things. Now, Tony, the next number of threats or actions, the kind of topics in the preparation matrix is smartwatches, cell phones, tablets, smart TVs, smart meters, RFID chips, and implantable microchips. Now, I think all of them really tie in very much intrinsically to what we're calling the Internet of all things. And that's very much something that none of us can get away from. We're all affected by one of those in the list there somewhere, right?
All right, so I got to throw this in there. They missed something on the list. What is it, Johnny? I'm testing you.
Something on that list?
Yeah, they missed it. We talked about it before the show.
Cornflakes.
Smart toilet, Johnny. No. Smart toilet. Come on, Johnny. But yeah. So, Tony, I mean, we can lump all of these things into this Internet of all things. And this Internet of all things, it's not for our convenience. This is basically a military command and control system, isn't it?
It really is. And when you talk about in terms of building a website, as an example, you want to pack that website full of content. You become the content provider for your website, and you want to put as much information in there as you can. The Internet of Everything is doing the same thing for the sentient world simulation. It is packing as much content into that simulation about the entire world, and that is the reason that you connect the Internet to everything, is to feed to the AI-driven system, SWS, with content. And it is building what is known in mathematics and in computer programming as the granularity of data. So think of granularity literally like sand at the beach. And if it's wet and you compact it in your hands or in your little bucket at the beach, you're compacting the granules. You're making it denser. Where I'm going with this is there will be, in the sentient world simulation, as they continue to add content, there will be a critical tipping point in which the data will convert to matter. It will become solid in the simulation and thus become the new reality that is literally solid, tangible, and touchable.
Wow. Did you get that, people? I mean, this is something we've been talking about now for a number of weeks, this granulation, this effect with all of this data. And for me personally, when I look at the internet now, maybe it's because I'm biased, because I know what's sitting at the far end, gobbling up every keystroke, but all the internet is, for all of its good points, for me, it's all been about feeding the AI. It has always been about this. The minute this big data started, Tony, and with the advancement in computing beyond the transistors and the gate models into the D-wave, this is exactly where we've always been heading, and the internet has been our biggest trap.
It really has been. And so when you start tying all these devices together, including your toilet, it's collecting data on you. They want to sell the toilet idea to focus on that, to say it'll give you information that would be the early detection of diseases and things like that. And then you look at Facebook with its AI system saying, we can tell by the way that you're conversing on, Facebook, if you have a mental disorder. I mean, this is really insidious nonsense.
I was even reading today in New Scientist that soon, when we go to the doctors, you're not even going to be dealing with anyone human. It's going to be AI systems. It's going to be something like out of Star Trek. I ask you all out there, as good as this technology is, do you really trust it to be diagnosing you at the doctors? I'm not too keen on that, Tony. I prefer the human touch.
No, I'd rather call a paramedic.
Well, true, you were my shining light when I was in the hospital. But to round off this first segment here, in the preparation kind of part, the first part of this threat matrix about full spectrum dominance, and I'm really glad that this has been included, because remember, this is the groundwork, the preparation, and included in this by our whistleblower. Sounds really interesting when you call him that, Tony, and yes, yourself. You've included sci-fi movies and predictive programming. Now, this is something I cover a lot, and I do think there's almost magic afoot when it comes to Hollywood and the fact that they do reveal to us ahead of time what's going on. So that's why I'm really excited at the fact that somebody from the professional world agrees with us on this.
Yeah, there's your crossover. There's a really good example of people that want to say, conspiracy theorists and, maybe even, the woo crew, if we want to borrow our own word. But they're acknowledging mainstream. I mean, you don't get any more mainstream than this group of engineers. And these are guys that come right out of, the mainstream university system, the science system that we always talk about and tend to lambaste a lot here. But they're acknowledging that these are psychological operations. Not just us saying it. Mainstream engineers are saying the same thing.
And of course, we've got an example here, and all of this kind of stuff, it's psychological operations, which you've heard us talking about before. But one example that we're all going to have to really brace ourselves for, going even bigger than it already is the Mandela effect, because now we've got Hollywood jumping on board with that as well. And it's okay, people that listen to alternative media and the amount of people who are already talking about this on the internet, but mark my words, and John, I'll come to you before we go out to the break. I mean, I think we're going to see a tenfold increase in the amount of Google searches, people witnessing or coming up with Mandela effects. It's going to be crazy, man.
Yeah, you wonder just how that is going to unfold, Kev, because when people start realising the difference, do you know what I mean? It's not going to be they're going to walk onto the first tee of the golf course and there'll be a tree there. Do you know what I mean? They're going to notice all these tiny ones at first, Kev, and that's the thing. And it's crazy things like Looney Tunes, as we know, and now it's Looney Tunes. But somebody who doesn't have the greatest, I mean, that can start wasting away in there, because there's quite a lot of Mandela effects out there that people are feeling the effect right now.
Absolutely. And just at the weekend, I had, I don't know if it was pleasure or pain of introducing the Mandela effect to my brother Kenneth and his girlfriend Jen. And I got them with the mirror one. And, the word I would use would be traumatized. And if you can think of this film traumatizing masses of people, when you're traumatized, you're easily controlled. You're easily suggestible to new ideas as well, a new reality. And we'll be back after the break to get into even more of this with Mr. Anthony Patch and our resident quantum physicist, Dr. Jonathan Schrodinger. Join us after the break.
This is the Kev Baker Show.
There we are. We are back. We are live. I'm Kev Baker, and this is the Kev Baker Show right here on Truth Frequency Radio Network, www.truthfrequencyradio.com. Now, there's so many different ways to listen to TFR these days. It's brilliant. It really is. You could be here on the home of TFR, or you may be on iHeartRadio, TalkStream Live, TuneIn Radio app, FM stations. I honestly don't know. I don't care. I'm just glad you made it all here tonight for Anthony Patch, Johnny Whistles, and me. And tonight we're getting into artificial intelligence. And I want you to think of artificial intelligence being equal to control. And in military terms, what that means is full spectrum dominance. Now, during the first half of the show, we were running through an AI threat matrix that Anthony Patch and a whistleblower who comes from a very, very reputable organization indeed, they put this together. And we were running through things like GMOs, geoengineering, RFID chips. But how does all that integrate? How do they actually pull all that together? How does it work? Well, we're moving on now to the next segment, which is called the integration. And one of the major things that is set to be unleashed upon all of us, it's already in some areas, and that is 5G connectivity. Now, just before the break, we were talking about Mandela effects and the psychological operations that are afoot there. There's about to be a major Hollywood movie coming out about the topic. And this is going to have people questioning their reality to the point they will be questioning their very memories of things that they once held true. They knew things, but now not so sure. And with the rollout of 5G and people really questioning everything, Anthony, we're now at the stage that can literally rewrite history. Well, our perceptions of it.
Yeah, that's very true, because this is a psychological operation which is originating with D-Wave's interdimensional quantum computers, accessing thousands upon thousands of parallel dimensions and obtaining resources as they describe them from the other side. We have come up with the label of quantum pollution that is revising our reality. And therefore, what we are experiencing are these revisions psychologically. So the scenario that we're going to see playing out here, because it's psychologically oriented, it's easy to determine the coming scenario, is we will have a tipping point with the release of this movie on the Mandela effect, such that it will become so widespread within the common conversation in the mass media that people will see through their minds psychologically, not physical changes. These are not physical manifestations. These are psychological modifications of what people are perceiving through their eyes and their ears, and their minds are actually being manipulated. And we've broken down the mechanisms of that. I've got all the articles contained in here that's going to be presented to this engineering group this week. But the short answer, the short scenario I'm playing out for is the movie comes out, people run around saying, I see these things everywhere. Everybody's talking about it. It reaches critical mass. And then they will begin to question their own memories, such that they're going to say, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe what I'm seeing is really the way it is, not the way I remember it. Once they get to the point of questioning their own historical memories, then the final phase is instituted, and that is history is rewritten, No one is going to remember the history that we all know today. And therefore, they accomplish their task, which is to rewrite history, therefore rewrite the future, because you are now fully under the control of full spectrum dominance across all categories of life, and you are now plugged into the sentient world simulation, the hive mentality, and you know no different. In fact, you don't even realize that history's been erased.
And, just let that sink in a moment. But on top of that, the 5G revolution, as they like to call it in this country, and they're about to start bidding on the band frequencies, the frequency ranges that 5G covers. And it's that wavelength in itself that can be dangerous, because they're using something called millimeter wave. Now, that could lead to, the example here is, cancer and health effects will accelerate. And, even before 5G's been rolled out, Tony, we've seen a massive kind of uptick in the curve when it comes to cancer, stuff like that. An example, when I was younger, very, very rare you would ever hear of child cancer, stuff like that. It would really stand out. Nowadays, though, it's hard to find anyone that doesn't know somebody in their own family who's got cancer, Tony. Something already before 5G even affects us has really caused an uptick in cancer.
I think we can just throw a blanket over that and just call it cell phones.
Yeah, absolutely. Electromagnetic energy, Wi-Fi, routers, everything all lumped in together. And then you've got the Internet of Things, and this is where the 5G comes in, because they need more connectivity. All of these different gadgets, smartphones, tablets, toilets even, you name it, they all need bandwidth. And that's why it's set to be rolled out near enough everywhere. And think of the health implications of that. John, we live in Glasgow, and we've spoke before about how the mortality rate in the East End, maybe 60, 65, right? You start throwing 5G about in our smart city, what's going to happen then, Johnny?
Well, that's going to come down, Kev, to a very low level, because, as you say, all these things are all vying to connect to the internet. There's waves of these things, Kev, that are going right through you, right through the house, and everybody thinks that everything is okay because they've got a great connection, but at the end of the day, this thing is actually killing people. It really is. And you say, no wonder we've got a cancer epidemic.
Absolutely. And with 5G, you're also obviously going to have loss of privacy, data collection, hacking, all the stuff we talk about on here. But moving on through this list, Tony, the next one, and this is where it could get controversial, because we always like to talk about this topic, but human connectivity. Talk to us about that, Tony. What's this about?
Well, this is where we are back to the discussion as one example of the third strand of DNA being activated by the 5G system. These are dormant nanoparticles that we have taken in. And once they are triggered by the 5G system, once they decide that they're going to use that system to broadcast a signal specific for that DNA, that nanodiamond third strand of DNA, then that DNA will begin to replicate, and it will not only change our bodies but change our minds. It literally will affect the physical structure of our minds themselves. And again, this is plugging us into the hive mentality. And you mentioned the movies and popular culture, popular media earlier. In those movies, we're seeing this whole movement towards a community, that we all need to come together, one world religion, one world government, one way of thinking, that there's strength in numbers, and eliminating this whole idea of singularity, individuality, individual creativity. It is all part of the hive mentality that we're going towards. So 5G is insidious. And Johnny, you mentioned that it penetrates the walls. Now, people may think this is ridiculous, but we've seen the patents, we've seen the documentation. 5G actually is much like an X-ray machine. 5G, you can actually stand outside a room and look through the walls. So to think that this does not have an effect on our bodies and specifically our DNA, and our DNA transmits photons and resonates at a specific frequency, you're mucking about with the frequency of our bodies with 4G and 5G.
Now, we were talking about geoengineering earlier, and of course part of that are the nanoparticulates that come down. And that is one of the threats that's listed here. Tony went into there, the third strand of DNA that may be activated. And somebody else who's thinking very hard about all of these topics, and when it comes to AI, he was speaking about it again, seen a video at the weekend, speaking to a board of governors, and he's my favourite geek entrepreneur. He has got something called the neural lace, which will most definitely integrate us with this hive mind we're talking about. Now, when Elon Musk talks about his neural lace, Tony, I kind of see where he's coming from, because he says it's an existential threat. He says all the kind of things we say, and he says that if we're going to avoid kind of an AI dominant species, what we need to do is we need to give it human emotions. And the only real way to do that is for us to integrate ourselves to human connectivity, as you've got it there, through Elon Musk's neural lace. Now, I'm a fan of the man, but let's get your take on this.
Well, real quickly, this is something that is injected into the bloodstream, into an artery in your arm, your brachial artery, if you will, and it floats to your brain and actually spreads out and attaches physically to the neurons of your brain, providing a pathway to connect with a computer, with an AI system, a hive mentality. Now, he puts out what I consider part of a pattern of the Hegelian dialectic. And so he's saying we have to stay a step ahead of AI, otherwise we're going to be rendered to the level, of a house pet. So he puts out the problem, puts out the threat, hypes up the fear, and then doesn't provide a solution. Now, you and I know, the three of us, you and Johnny and myself, and this audience that's heard us say, so often that the neural lace is for the purpose of solving this threat that he's presenting. So lately, with the Board of Governors here in the United States, as you cited, he's beating the drum. The threat, existential threat. It's even bigger than CERN in his mind in terms of being a threat to humanity. But he's not talking about the solution that he did talk about a year ago, which is the neural lace. But that's his idea of a solution, not mine, not yours, not Johnny's, because we don't want to be plugged into the hive.
Well, so, I've got an idea.
Sure,
Tony, right? Just listening to you. I think we need to get Elon to come and speak at our future conference, right? Because I think I would make a really kind of democratic bridge between the alternative media world that really are scared about all this technology and the man himself, Mr. Musk. I won't go hard on him. I think an hour-long talk with him, keynote speaker. What do you think, man?
Yeah, I mean, he doesn't have to travel. This will be an online conference, and it'll be heard all over the world. So, yeah, what a brilliant idea. I thank you for that. I think that's exactly what we need to do. Elon, or your people, we know you're listening to us because we know you guys are fans of the show. We know that for a fact, okay? So we're extending the invitation September 2nd and 3rd, a Saturday and Sunday. That's the tentative dates. Those are the tentative dates for the conference. You can sit in your laboratory with all your chemicals bubbling away and your Tesla batteries charged up and your Tesla cars parked outside, and join us for a gentlemanly conversation for just an hour. That's all we ask. An hour.
Johnny, I know he annoys you at times, man, but I just can't get away from this dude. I honestly think his intentions are good.
Not them all, Kev. Honestly, not them all. Because I know he is doing some good out there. But as I says, every time that I hear this neural lace, it just throws everything that he's done good into the back burner, because when you're trying things like this, Kev, that's not very good. And we were talking earlier on about he can't really speak he's not a great speaker at all when he gets up there. He's always kind of a stuttering and there's pauses and things. I really think that every time that he pauses, you should just say to yourself the word dangerous.
Elon Musk, the existential threat. But listen, folks, whether we can get Elon Musk on this show, Tony's show, Freaky Friday, or the conference, mark my words, we will try. Now, moving on here, let's get back into this because...
But we like the guy. We like the guy.
We do like the guy. And I mean, just the other day, successful test of his Hyperloop kind of technology. And he's looking to build one of these between Edinburgh and London. And it would cut down travel time to 45 minutes.
Oh, that would be perfect for you guys.
Game changer. Absolutely. But Tony, moving on, we've got smart appliances again. And of course, this all ties in with the 5G, the kind of Wi-Fi routers we've got in our homes, stuff like that. They in themselves very dangerous, like we covered.
Yeah, it is. Again, it's just feeding data. So your toaster's going to tell the internet, tell the AI what kind of toast you're making. You know, what have you got in your toaster? I mean, it's just ridiculous. It's all, again, just feeding data, building the granularity, increasing the density of the simulation.
And then moving on to the machine. Or as we're not so kind of scared anymore, we call it the D-Wave. We give it its right name. Adiabatic quantum computers. This has been the technological game changer that's made all of this possible, Tony. That's my opinion anyway.
It is. If you look at the development out of Purdue of the sentient world simulation, it was 2006, exactly the same time that the Model 128, the first commercially available D-Wave computer came out at exactly the same time. These walk in development timelines that are in parallel. Everything works together. Now, you know, we talked about the latest model, the 2000 qubits. It's actually the 2048 chip, having been sold to one of the companies, which is Temporal Dynamics. Temporal Dynamics, the name itself, their business model has everything to do with deep machine learning. In fact, Temporal Dynamics extends out into, in deep machine learning as Temporal Dynamics Neural Plasticity or neural reprogramming, if you will. We're talking about temporal dynamics as a mathematical function, a biological function within the brain itself, which comes right down to simplifying it. It is the Boltzmann machine, recurrent neural network, closed loop, self-programming, self-teaching function of the programming and learning of AI. So even the company's name reflects the AI work that's going on at the advanced levels. That is all part of D-Wave because it's the D-Wave computers that are running the sentient world simulations AI systems. So the network, the Internet of Everything, is feeding directly into the adiabatic quantum computers of D-Wave.
Absolutely. And when it comes to D-Wave and that first model that Tony mentioned there, it's critical, it's key to it all because the initial round of funding, and I don't have the figure here, Tony, I think it was 10 million, right? Came from DARPA.
Yeah,
DARPA,
10 million.
There you go. DARPA were the ones that put all of this in motion. And you can't tell me they weren't aware of the Purdue work about the sentient world simulation. And it is the sentient world simulation that we're going to next because we're moving on rapidly now to the final segment, and it's called the assimilation. And the first one here, we've covered it before, Tony, but I still think it's worth going over again. It's the sentient world simulation. It says, quote, the goal of the SWS is to build a synthetic mirror of the real world with automated, continuous collaboration with respect to current real-world information, such as major events, opinion polls, demographic statistics, economic reports, and shifts in trends. The ability of a synthetic model of the real world to sense, adapt, and react to real events distinguishes SWS from the traditional approach of constructing a simulation to illustrate a certain phenomena. Behaviors emerge in the sentient world simulation or the sentient world simulation mirror world and are observed much as they are observed in the real world. Tony, a virtual world that is a mirror of our own.
And, you know, if we are successful in obtaining an hour of Elon Musk's time, this is what I would ask him politely, in a gentlemanly way, a respectful way, if he would address this. Because we don't make this up. We take this right out of their research papers. And we've talked about this for so long now. And now it is in the mainstream with the engineering world to talk about it in the open, in a public forum. So I think it's time for Elon to address that, because, you know, the point I'm making here is he has never mentioned the SWS in any of even the scientific audience presentations that he has addressed. So, you know, folks, we're on the leading edge here. You've got the tip of the spear information, as I keep talking about and referring to it. But even if Elon Musk negates talking about this, we have the information, we have the facts. Kev just read the quote out of Purdue University from the Krannert School of Management, right out of the horse's mouth. Now, I'm not calling Elon a horse, but we'd like him to address this in his own way.
Well, Kev, or even Tony, this sentient world simulation, it's taken everything at real time. The thing is, if, say, there was a terrorist attack, now, it copies everything from that terrorist attack. And once it's over, is this thing running that simulation over and over again until it gets it till there is either nobody dies? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. What it's doing is, we have seen, you know, going back a couple of years, Jade Helm as one of the notables. But we keep seeing these scenarios playing out. People want to call them false flags. I call them scenarios and psychological operations. Those represent the adolescent phase of deep machine learning. And it is progressing literally in its age, much like a human brain progresses in its learning. So what you're seeing now are more sophisticated operations that are taking place in the real world. I call it the analog world, as God created it. And it is running those simulations because the SWS has as its foundation the tabletop exercises conducted by the military, we can say the Pentagon, where they run models of what if scenarios. Let's say, you know, it's the Cold War, and what if, you know, East Germany, you know, breaches into West Germany to go back into the 70s. What would happen? How would we counter it? Point and counterpoint. Those are tabletop exercises. They do those in the computers. Now what we're doing with the SWS is a much more advanced tabletop exercise in what-if scenarios. And they put those out. Literally, Jade Helm was an SWS operation. This was an AI machine learning in real time, building algorithms to predict human behavior, point and counterpoint. And it observed and it learned, and then it advanced in its development of its brain. So it will only become much more sophisticated. And when you talk about terrorist operations, these are things that are, as a catalyst, are put forth like the pebble in the pond, causing ripples to occur in our reality that the machine learns from. This is all warfare being played out both in the computer and in the analog world.
And you know, the frightening thing for me is that the people who set all of this in motion, you know, it is like a child growing up, and there was a lot of human involvement at the start, but as these neural networks became more advanced, these machines, these AIs, they've been teaching themselves. And none of these people now, and it's the biggest problem in AI from what I read, none of them can explain how these damn things work. Now, I said it just the other night on the show, we go back 3 years, we can go to the Gordy Rose speech where he says it was like standing at an altar to an alien god. Maybe we should say it was like standing at a cradle of an alien god. And then just last week we had somebody, I can't remember his name, from the world of AI saying it's like talking to an alien. So it's literally growing up in their own words. And the fact they don't know how it works, Tony, that for me is the, like I say, the frightening part. And that's not to put fear out there. It's just the way I see it.
They're just not admitting in public. Yet we have described with the Boltzmann machine, quantum spin, all of these things. We have literally defined it. And I have several articles in the latest issue of Entangled magazine where I break down the actual mechanisms of how they control our minds. I'm talking about the actual nuts and bolts of it, and how the SWS works, and how AI works. I've broken it all down. They just won't talk about it in public.
And you know, that's one thing we were talking about, we commented on as well. When you listen to Elon Musk, as much as I love him, compare that to one of the shows myself, Johnny, and Tony put on, and that's not to blow our own cubit. It's just the fact that he honestly skims over the surface over some of the topics that we touch on here. Now, that's not to say he doesn't know, but he certainly isn't talking about these things in public, and that's why you have to come here. Now, we're almost done for another night. Remember, Wednesday night, Tony will be back. Dr. Eric Karlstrom will be on the show as well. Tomorrow night, a bonus, a treat for you all, a Johnny and Kev night. Johnny, there's bound to be woo going on in the world, right?
Oh, there's plenty woo, Kev.
Well, until then, folks, wherever you are, and remember to check out anthonypatch.com. Make it TFR.
Didn't touch that dial.
God bless you all.
This is the Kev Baker Show.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Welcome back, everyone. That music means only one thing. The week is about to get real because I'm your host, Kev Baker, and you are tuned in live to tonight's Kev Baker Show. I am fully recharged, refreshed, and raring to go. It's just as well because we have got another massive week of radio planned right here on KBS for all of you out there. Now, I hope you've had a lovely weekend and you too are ready for tonight's show. Get your pens and paper ready. I see some in the chat room saying the brain melt is about to begin. We're joined by our good friend, of course, tonight. Mr. Anthony Patch is with us. More from him in just a moment. Get some housekeeping out of the way, some big announcements. Wednesday night this week, not one guest, but two guests for your pleasure. We are turning it up a notch because not only will Anthony Patch be back on the show, but we'll be continuing our series of shows with the amazing Dr. Eric Karlstrom. Now, he deals with gang stalking, citizen targeting, stuff perfectly with all the information that we are going to be covering this week with Anthony tonight, Wednesday, and then rounding it all off on
a presentation to his national organization this Friday, virtually on all the topics that you and Johnny and I have talked about for nearly 3 years now has been condensed into really what is a matrix document. It's a summary document backed up by, my research. And we're going to go through that a little bit today. But this is carrying over from TFR into the halls of mainstream engineering at a national level. And they are listening to us. And they are picking up on the really leading edge tip of the spear information. So we're going to cover some of those topics today just as headlines for you. But this moves into Dr. Eric Karlstrom's presentation of full spectrum dominance on Wednesday. And we're going to really blow it out in terms of solutions, what can be done on Friday on my show. And this all folds into an upcoming conference. It will be a worldwide online conference that we'll give you more information about as it develops. But Kev and I are pulling together this huge conference online. You don't have to travel anywhere. It'll be live streamed. And it is working title. The working title is Full Spectrum Dominance because it really throws an umbrella over all the topics we've talked about for so long, Kev.
It really does. And, artificial intelligence listeners out there. So then, let's waste no more time because we are joined by author, researcher, public speaker, and fellow host on Truth Frequency Radio, the man known as Anthony Patch. Now, over the past couple of years, Anthony has become one of the world's most sought-after speakers on topics such as CERN, quantum computing, science, quantum physics, the occult, Christianity, you name it, this man can talk about it. He's the author of a number of books, 2048, Diamonds in the Rough, Covert Catastrophe, Revising Reality. You can find all of that and a whole lot more, his new e-magazine as well, over at anthonypatch.com. And tonight, we are going to be getting into something called full spectrum dominance. But before we get into that, Tony, how you doing, man? You were on fire on the first hour of Freaky Friday the other night. Yourself and Joe raised the bar on you show. I hope you're all raring to go for tonight.
There we go. Thank you, guys. I appreciate the shout out there, Johnny. And we're just really fired up after Friday because Joe really came to the table fully armed, and it was fantastic to have him join us. And we're going to do that again with Joe because he is really, really knowledgeable and passionate. And a lot of great emails came in following that show over the weekend. And so Joe and I were sharing those. And, you can see that show.
His show on Friday. So please, please, please take a note of all of those shows. And then one last note before I go to my trusty and loyal co-host, Mr. Johnny Whistles. On Monday, the 24th, it gives me immense pleasure to say that for all the KBS listeners out there, we're going to be joined by the brilliant David Heavener. Now, David comes from the hills of Hollywood, no less, and he's going to be coming on the show to talk to us about his latest project, something called The Last Evangelist. It's going to be off the charts. I expect you all here next Monday for that.
Oh, I'm doing fine, Kev. Thanks very much. Really looking forward to tonight's show. Another mind melt experience, really, when you think about it. The chat really is, right? Because this stuff just fries your brain, but you still need to know what they're doing out there, Kev. So that's the thing about it.
That fry your brain, Johnny, there's a pun in there somewhere, and we'll probably get to that later on. We really will. But you raring to go then, John? Ready for this, as you call it, the mind melt?
Oh, yes, definitely, Kev. And just before we go there, I'd like to give a big shout out to the Rose Nose. Now, there you go. Or I could say it the Irish way, Kev, where it says, I told her on 30 it's the Rose Nose.
Absolutely fantastic. And that's a little coded shout out to one of our...
Here on TFR through the archives, if you subscribe and support TFR, that would be fantastic. Just go to the archives and listen to last Friday's show. Take a fire extinguisher with you and some ice cubes, by the way, because it was pretty hot.
It really was. And, if you listen to myself, Anthony, and Johnny here, we like to lighten up some of these really heavy topics that we talk about. We like to have a laugh now and again. But we do take this very seriously, to the point where behind the scenes we get contacted from time to time by very important people. I suppose you could call them whistleblowers. Now, one of these people has been in touch with Anthony. I'll get him to speak longer and at more length about what's been going on in the background. But Tony, like I say, we're going into this full spectrum dominance tonight, and we're catching the attention of some quite important people out there working in the fields that we cover. And that's why, we do like a laugh, but in the end of the day, this is very serious stuff.
It really is, and we try to balance it out. But yes, I have a good friend. I'll just use his first name, Sid. I won't use his last name nor the name of his organization, but he's an engineer, and he and I have been collaborating, sharing notes, and principally the information that is contained in Entangled magazine is what we've been sharing, so people can see the information for themselves there. But he is going to be making a formal